Hey guys! So now that we've finished the 16 types, we're now in a position to analyze the alpha and the gamma psychology. So once again, we have Asher Augusta to thank for these terms. The types with the Fi+Te, but also an Se+Ni axis, she called the gamma types. And the types with an Fe+Ti axis, but also an Ne+Si axis, she calls the alpha types. Now for us, the psychological definitions of these terms will be something that we're going to explore from scratch, given the evidence that we've been gathering in the series so far. And we're going to start first here with the gamma types. So to paint a full picture of the quadrant, as we said before, we need to look at the conductor types and the revisor types separately and then put them together as a unified whole. So on the conductor side of things, which is the Te plus Ni combination, we have what I broadly call the meritocratic types. And on the revisor side, which is the Fi plus Se combination, we have what I broadly call the sensualist types. Now, when I use these terms, I use them qualitatively, of course, the same way that we use qualitative terms for the four energetics, such as the king energy and the puer energy. They are useful shorthands in order to help us paint a general picture of the group, but the terms themselves are not meant to be taken too literally. So when it comes to the gamma conductor types, we actually do see explicit mentions of a meritocratic viewpoint in people such as Ben Shapiro. For example, here he says, meritocracy is a prerequisite for societal success. The alternatives are artificial hierarchies and corrupt rent-seeking. We also heard meritocratic sentiments in Kirsten Hadid in the videos we saw. For example, when she says, let people fail and learn from their mistakes. Basically, people benefit from doing it themselves, from having and developing agency. And then we also see it a bit more implicitly in people like Mike Huckabee when he says, I understand what it means to make tough decisions, follow through, and get results. There again, we see that he's highlighting his own merit and ability. Now with the NITE types, we see a less preachy approach to meritocracy, and instead we see a more embodied approach. So for example, in people like Fabiano Caruana, the chess grandmaster we saw, and Sandy Monroe, the automotive expert, they may not preach meritocracy, but they act through it. We can see that they apply it to themselves and use it to be at the top of their game. Now, even in the more spiritual NITE types, for example, with Rampalji Maharaj and Adidas Samraj, we see this exaltation of one's own abilities, with both of them claiming to be avatars of God. So you can see there this focus on personal power. So although you will have a lot of gamma conductors that hold a meritocratic ideology, not all of them will subscribe to meritocracy proper as like a political ideology. But even if they don't hold a meritocratic ideology, the way in which they comport themselves in life, the way in which they personally address challenges will nonetheless be through a merit-based lens. And this is because, like the delta types, they approach the world mechanically. But the delta types approach the world two ways, mechanically, but also in a compartmentalized fashion. And that's due to their SI, which essentially views each situation as separate and specific. And this separation of contexts makes it so that the bureaucrats don't apply one solution to all situations. They tailor and specify their approach to a given context. And so they can be caught in red tape because of that also. But the gamma types perceive one holistic situation made up of various intersecting layers, which actually makes it simpler for them to navigate reality and to push through in a more generalized, broad strokes fashion, kind of bulldozing through the details. Gamma types have this, what I call mechanical holism, where they perceive one non-negotiable reality that is happening in alignment to NI trend lines and which can be mechanically gamed in their favor. And so generally speaking, there's no confusion in the gamma conductor type about what reality is. It's just a matter of whether you want to or can do something about it, which is why life is seen meritocratically primarily. Now, as for the gamma revisor types, we use the term sensualist. We saw examples of sensualist gammas in people like Marilyn Monroe, Hitomi Mochizuki, Madonna, Michael Jackson, and many other examples. Now the term sensualist stands in contrast to the beta revisor types, which are called the sensationalists. The sensationalist also possesses undertones of physicality and viscerality, yes, but it also has analytical undertones. Now the sensualist also possesses undertones of physicality and viscerality, but it also carries undertones of intimacy and sexuality. And this is because while the beta types do possess a connection to the physical, their TI still creates a level of detachment between them and the world. But the gamma types have a twofold intimacy given their Fi. And so the SE gives them that physical contact, yes, but the FI gives them this emotional closeness, a greater intimacy, or what I call a more direct embodiment of themselves in the flesh. And this is what gives gamma types that added sensual component, as we saw in the samples. And of course, this doesn't mean that gamma revisers are all sultry or seductive. There are plenty of modest, very pious gammas, as we saw with Jackie Kennedy and Princess Diana. But even then, their lived experience will still not detach from that intimate self, that embodied self. And so you'll see this, even very modest gammas will radiate out this intimate presence into the world. And that's the essence of what is meant by the sensualist type. So on the whole, this makes gamma types meritocratic sensualists. And every gamma type has this duality within them. One side is very ambitious and goes after whatever they want to achieve. The other seeks contentment and equanimity within themselves without needing to seek anything. One side is very focused on the future and following visions and predictions of what can be, while the other is focused on the present moment and enjoying the now. And so this eternal drama between the two sides of the gamma types are part of what define the gamma quadrant. As for the alpha types, we see quite the opposite expression of motifs. On the conductor side, with the functions Fe plus Si, we have what I call the diplomatic types. And on the revisor side, with the combination of Ti plus Ne, we have what I call the ephemeralist types. So we saw the diplomatic tendencies of the alpha conductor types with people such as Richard Schechner, who focuses on social interaction rituals and dynamics of keeping the peace. And then we also saw it in Nelson Mandela, who's known as an anti-apartheid activist focused on fostering social reconciliations. And we saw it in Becky Bailey, who aims to help families to encourage cooperation and to decrease power struggles, and many other alpha types that we went through. Now, the alpha diplomats stand in contrast to the beta sectarians. Both of these combos focus on collective organization, right? The alpha types combine Fe's more collectivist focus with the more anecdotal and contextual approach of Si. But since every context is different, and that's what Si does, right? It discretely delineates this is something else, and this is something else. And so that difference creates a different need for each context, a different social need for every social context. And so the alpha conductors necessarily take a more horizontal social approach. But then the question is, how do you create cohesion across that realm? Well, the only way to create cohesion would be to be more diplomatic in the various different approaches, which are contextually specific. And that's different than the beta types, because the beta type will tend to read out these timeless principles of social organization, which undergird all cultures, and they'll emphasize those universal truths while minimizing local truths. And so they'll tend to generalize their social approach across the board, leading to the aforementioned sectarian philosophical views, since there ends up being one timeless view rather than a lot of little local views. Now, compared to the gamma conductor types, the alpha conductors are the most dissimilar. While the gamma conductors seek ambition and drive as it pertains to themselves and their point of view, the alpha conductors put their own point of view more or less on equal standing with what others think and seek more egalitarian solutions. Moving on now to the alpha revisor types, that would be the NETI and the Ti+Ne, we have what I call the ephemeralists. Now, while I'm not quite satisfied with this word, it's the best I could find to describe this combination of the energy created by Ti plus Ne. Ephemeral generally means lasting for a very short time. It means being transient, it means impermanent and fleeting. But ephemeral can also be used to describe something somewhat translucent, something ungraspable, something unreachable and formless and beyond. Now, both meanings apply to Ti and Ne, but it's the latter meaning here that I wish to highlight. So we saw this obsession with impermanence and formlessness in Billy Doyle, who aimed to dissolve everything he'd taken himself to be, which is one kind of ephemerality. And then we see in Michael Huemer this tendency to deconstruct social ideas and philosophies and being left with very little in the end. And as he said, you may not find truth to philosophical ideas, but you can be less wrong. But it's still this kind of negation focus, this more agnostic or apophatic approach to ideas. And so it's easy enough to see the ephemeral qualities of Ti since it's the most prone to detachment. But what about Ne? Well, from another point of view, we can also see the same ephemerality in Ne. So the any function can take many different forms, but in so doing, it lacks one canonical form, as we saw with Cicely Brown and her artwork. And in that sense, every form they take, every parody they make, every idea they entertain is ephemeral, is fleeting, is changing. There is substance there because any users positively affirm beingness, they positively affirm experience, but not any one particular experience, which makes all forms and shapes ephemeral. Now, this is in complete contrast to the gamma sensualist types, which are the most explicitly affirming of singular personal beingness, a singular bodily truth, a singular heart truth. So you see, once again, the gamma types and the alpha types being polar opposites, which is what you would expect, right? Given that they share no functions in common. And so that's another point of the CT system making a positive prediction about types being opposite in psychology if they have opposite voltologies. So this really lets us know that the alpha, beta, gamma, and delta quadrants are real. We can see the effects and how they change the philosophical views, the embodied views, and the approaches that these types have. Now, to complete the symmetry here, we can also compare the alpha ephemeralist to the delta etherealist. So as you would expect, these two have something in common. Both the words ephemeral and ethereal have in them an element of otherworldliness, a non-literal element to them, a dreamy or hazy quality to them, which comes from the sharing of NE. But while the etherealist still positively affirms and celebrates a definite soul, a definite heart essence in whatever form it takes, the ephemeralists often put their own essence aside. Now, it doesn't mean that the ephemeralists see themselves as lacking heart essence necessarily. Of course they do, but they tend to downplay it or distrust it generally, at least relative to the delta types. And so this gives them a comparatively less ethereal energy. Alrighty, and so on the whole, the alpha types can be described as diplomatic ephemeralists. And these two halves make an internal conflict inside the alpha types. Because on one hand, you have this inclination to engage in society and try to organize society collaboratively together. But on the other hand, you have this tendency to be skeptical and very critical of any structures of society at all. On the one hand, you have this tendency to honor specific rituals and traditions and knowledge. But on the other hand, you have this impulse to ingest all possibilities rather than remain static and located within a specific set of them. And this represents that timeless polemic that the type has internally. All right, and so here we have them, the four function quadrants, alpha, beta, gamma, and delta. The four conductor styles can be thought of roughly as different political attitudes: diplomatic, bureaucratic, meritocratic, or sectarian. And the four revisor styles are roughly four different approaches to lived experience. And so lived experience could be ephemeral, ethereal, sensationalist, or sensualist. So now, having wrapped up the four function quadrants, we're going to move on to CT's metabolism.